when a kingdom chose fear over freedom. In every era, there are men who live quietly, and then there are men who rise because silence becomes impossible. Scotland in the late 13th century was not a land of peace. It was a land trapped beneath a foreign crown, a kingdom forced to kneel before England, castles flown with the wrong banners, fields taxed by foreign hands, families punished for speaking too loudly of freedom. Most people survived this life the only way they could, by staying silent. But one man did not choose silence. His name was William Wallace. He was not born a king. He did not grow up in a palace. He had no crown, no throne, no royal army. Yet the greatest empire in Europe would one day call him the most dangerous man in Scotland. Not because he was rich, not because he was noble, but because he refused to bend. This is not just the story of a warrior. This is the story of how a single man made a kingdom rise, and why an empire decided he had to be erased in the most terrifying way imaginable. The world that forged him. William Wallace was born around 1270 in a Scotland struggling to survive. At the time, Scotland's king had died without a clear heir. England's ruler, King Edward I, saw his chance. Edward was known as the Hammer of the Scots. He didn't believe Scotland should have a king of its own. He believed Scotland should be owned. Slowly, brutally, conditions worsened. English soldiers walked through Scottish towns as masters. Scottish nobles were forced to swear loyalty to England. Heavy taxes crushed ordinary families. Any talk of rebellion was punished. William grew up watching his people suffer under a rule that did not care if they lived or died. Where other boys were taught to obey, he was taught to remember. He learned to use weapons not as tools of conquest, but as shields for his people. He learned the forests, the hills, the hidden paths, and most importantly, he learned anger. But anger alone does not make a legend. Loss does. A personal breaking point in popular stories. William's rebellion begins after the loss of a woman he loved, a symbol of life stolen by a cruel system. Whether every detail is history or legend, one truth remains. Something inside him broke. Something that would never be repaired. From that moment forward, William Wallace no longer lived for himself. He lived for resistance, and resistance turned him into a symbol. He gathered small groups of men who felt the same rage. Farmers, shepherds, sons of blacksmiths, men who had nothing left to lose. They struck quickly, vanishing into forests before the enemy could react, hitting supply lines, freeing prisoners, destroying outposts. England began to notice, and the people of Scotland began to whisper his name. Wallace, a name carried through villages like a prayer or a warning. The battle that turned a man into a myth. Everything changed at the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297. England arrived with a powerful army. Thousands of heavily armored soldiers. They expected obedience, they expected fear. They expected a quick victory. William Wallace never gave them what they expected. He used the land, the narrow bridge. The timing, the intelligence that only a native son of the land could possess. When the English army crossed the bridge, they were trapped. Surrounded, outmaneuvered, defeated. Against all odds, the untrained Scots had shattered the greatest military force in the region. News traveled fast. A poor Scottish warrior had humiliated the King of England. Europe took notice. Scotland found hope. William Wallace was named Guardian of Scotland, the closest thing to a protector of the entire nation. For a moment in time, a common man carried a kingdom on his shoulders, the rise and the betrayal. But empires do not forgive humiliation. Edward I returned, this time with a far greater force. In 1298, at the Battle of Falkirk, Wallace faced a powerful, organized enemy. Some Scottish nobles, fearing England more than they believed in freedom, did not fully support him. The English archers destroyed his ranks. The battlefield was lost. But what truly crushed Wallace was betrayal, not by the enemy but by his own world. He stepped down as guardian, choosing to disappear into shadow. But even in hiding, his name was too strong. England issued rewards. Scottish traders listened. Gold tempted loyalties. For years he evaded capture. A ghost in forests, a legend among villagers, until someone close to his world chose money over honor. And William Wallace was finally captured, not on a battlefield but through betrayal. The long road to London. Wallace was transported in chains to London, not as a prisoner but as a message. England wanted the world to see, this is what happens to those who defy us. Crowds gathered to witness the fall of a man who had dared to stand against a king. He was accused of treason. But Wallace made one final powerful statement. I could not betray a king I never swore loyalty to. He refused to beg, he refused to kneel, and he refused to apologize for fighting for his people. England did not want justice, they wanted fear. They wanted to destroy the symbol as completely as possible. His execution was designed not simply to end a life, but to end an idea. Yet something strange happened. The more they tried to humiliate him, the more he became immortal. People spoke his name with reverence. Children whispered his story. Soldiers carried his legend into battle. They could end the man, but not what he represented. When death creates immortality, William Wallace died as a prisoner, but he lives as a storm in history. England believed his execution would end rebellion. Instead, it ignited it. Years later, another Scottish leader, Robert the Bruce, would rise. And Scotland would finally reclaim its freedom. Not because of an army, not because of a crown, but because one man proved that courage could terrify an empire. William Wallace was not perfect. He was not royal, he was not protected. But he carried something more powerful than gold or title. He carried the idea that no throne is higher than human freedom. And that idea has never died. Even now, centuries later, his name is still spoken. Not as a criminal, not as a traitor, but as a legend. Because some men don't need a crown to become kings of history. They only need a cause worth dying for. William Wallace was one of those men. And the empire that tried to destroy him only made him eternal.